Black girl tells judge that she is hungry. What he did next left everyone in shock. Kira's life changed forever the moment she stood before a judge, hungry and desperate, asking for a simple meal. Little did she know that one moment would ignite a chain of events that would shape her destiny. From the streets to law school, she fought tirelessly for justice, overcoming every obstacle life threw her way. Her journey was filled with struggles, triumphs, and heartbreaks, but through it all, one thing remained clear. Kira was determined to make a difference. This is the story of how a girl's hunger led to a fight for justice that changed everything. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the young girl, barely 13, stood in front of the judge. Her worn-out clothes and exhausted face told a story of hardship that no one had bothered to ask about. The judge, an experienced middle-aged man, glanced over at her with a calm, neutral expression. He had seen many cases, but something about this one felt different. Her eyes, though tired, were sharp, desperate, yet somehow full of defiance. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edges of the witness stand, trying to hold herself together. "Your Honor," the girl began, her voice barely a whisper. I'm really hungry." The room seemed to hold its breath. The judge raised an eyebrow, not fully understanding. It wasn't uncommon for people to ask for things in court, but this was different. This was a child, and hunger wasn't something anyone expected to hear in such a place. It wasn't a plea for mercy or for help with her case. It was a raw, vulnerable moment that shook the very air around them. The judge's eyes narrowed as he looked at the girl. He had heard about the tough circumstances many kids like her faced: poverty, neglect, and the cycle of injustice. But this wasn't just about hunger. It was about what was being said without words. This child's simple request spoke volumes about the broken system, about how children were often neglected or forgotten. Without a moment's hesitation, the judge stood up, walked to his desk, and picked up the phone. What happened next left everyone in the room stunned as he made a decision that would change everything. The judge's phone call was met with confusion. The room buzzed with whispers as his authority was momentarily questioned. The bailiff looked up, unsure if he should intervene. The girl, still standing in the witness box, kept her head low, her frail frame shrinking into itself. But the judge was resolute. After a brief conversation, he hung up the phone, then turned back to face the room. "We'll take a recess," he declared. "I'll be right back." As everyone filed out of the courtroom, the girl was left alone. She could barely comprehend what had just happened. She'd never been in a courtroom before, and the idea that anyone might care about her hunger, about her pain, was beyond belief. She thought about her life on the streets, how every day had been a struggle for food, for safety. She had never felt so vulnerable yet somehow. In that moment, a tiny glimmer of hope flickered inside her. Back in his chambers, Judge Thompson paced the room. He was no stranger to poverty, having grown up in a struggling household himself. But seeing a child, hungry and alone, broke something inside him. He had grown numb to the struggles of the people who came before him. But this girl's quiet plea had awakened something he thought he had lost long ago: empathy. As he sat down at his desk, he looked over the case files again. The girl, named Kira, had been caught stealing food. But was she really the criminal here? Or was it a system that had failed her from the start? The judge knew he had to make a choice. What he did next would set the tone for the rest of the day, and perhaps change the course of Kira's life forever. The courtroom reconvened after a brief break, and when everyone took their seats, the judge surprised everyone with his next move. "I am dismissing the charges against Kira," Judge Thompson announced firmly. A ripple of disbelief went through the room. The prosecutor, who had been eager to secure a conviction, stood up in protest. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The law must be upheld." The judge remained calm, his voice steady. "Sometimes we must look beyond the law and recognize humanity. This child is a victim, not a criminal. What she needs is not punishment, but help." Kira's eyes widened in shock. She had expected to be sent to juvenile detention, or worse, to be turned out onto the streets again. But this was a miracle. Kira's story came to light as the judge demanded a full investigation into her background. She was an orphan, abandoned at a young age, and had been living in foster homes that never truly cared for her. She had run away from the last one, unable to bear the mistreatment any longer. Her days were spent begging on street corners and stealing what little food she could find. But the trauma of her past was too much to carry alone. As the investigation unfolded, the people in the courtroom began to understand the full extent of Kira's pain. The judge, with newfound determination, decided to take matters into his own hands. He arranged for Kira to receive counselling and food assistance. But he didn't stop there. He called in a social worker to help place her in a proper foster home, one that would provide the care and love she had long been denied. The case gained national attention, sparking debates across the country. People were divided. Some hailed the judge as a hero for showing compassion, while others criticized him for bending the law. But one thing was clear. The case had opened a conversation about the cracks in the system that allowed children like Kira to fall through. Media outlets picked up the story, sharing Kira's plight and the judge's brave decision to do what was right, rather than what was easy. Kira's life was about to change forever. For the first time, she felt seen. The kind words from the judge, the kindness of the social workers, and the support from the community began to restore her faith in the possibility of a better life. But even as she began to heal, the journey ahead was far from easy. Kira was placed in a new foster home, a small house with a warm and inviting atmosphere. The couple that took her in were kind, patient, and determined to give her a fresh start. Her new foster mother, Mrs. Miller, was particularly understanding, having worked with children from troubled backgrounds for years. Kira was still afraid that this new life might be too good to be true, afraid that she would disappoint them as she had disappointed so many others before. But Mrs. Miller reassured her time and again, showing her that trust could be earned. The journey was slow. Kira attended school where she struggled with fitting in at first, but her teachers noticed her quiet intelligence. They encouraged her to open up, to trust in the process, and bit by bit, Kira started to believe in herself. As Kira settled into her new foster home, she found herself haunted by the ghosts of her past. She had nightmares about her time on the streets, about being abandoned by everyone who was supposed to protect her. The new house, with its warmth and kindness, felt foreign to her. She often found herself withdrawing, unsure of how to trust those around her. Mrs. Miller, noticing the signs of trauma, suggested counselling. Kira hesitated at first, unsure if she could open up to a stranger about the pain she had kept buried for so long. But she soon realized that the therapy sessions weren't about rehashing every painful memory. They were about learning how to move forward. Though her progress was slow, Kira began to open up in small ways. She confided in Mrs. Miller about the hunger she had endured on the streets, the feeling of not knowing where her next meal would come from. Mrs. Miller listened patiently, offering comfort and support. Kira didn't know it then, but these small conversations would be the foundation of her healing. Kira's first day at her new school was filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had never been in one place long enough to form real friendships, and the idea of fitting in was daunting. The kids in her class noticed her worn-out clothes, and whispers followed her down the hall. But there was something different about Kira now. She didn't respond to their teasing with the anger she once might have. Instead, she focused on keeping her head down and doing her best to succeed. Her teacher, Mrs. Roberts, quickly saw that Kira had an exceptional mind. She wasn't just a shy, quiet girl. She was sharp, intelligent, and eager to learn. Mrs. Roberts took Kira under her wing, giving her extra attention and encouragement. Kira, though still unsure of herself, began to thrive in the classroom. The respect she had earned from her peers wasn't immediate, but over time, they started to see her for who she truly was, a girl with potential, not just a victim of her circumstances. A few weeks into her new life, Kira started to smile more often. She spent her afternoons studying with Mrs. Roberts and her evenings doing homework with Mrs. Miller, who would often help her with her math problems. The sense of safety and stability was slowly becoming more familiar to Kira, but deep down, she still feared it could all be taken away. Mrs. Miller noticed her hesitation when it came to getting too close. She gently reminded Kira that trust took time and that it was okay to be afraid. Kira had an unusual amount of resilience for someone her age, but there was one thing she had always known. You can't trust anyone forever. Yet, something about Mrs. Miller's unwavering kindness made her start to believe that maybe, just maybe, there were people in the world who could be trusted. A month after the court case, Judge Thompson decided to check in on Kira's progress. He had been following her story closely, keeping in touch with the social workers involved. It wasn't often that a judge took such a personal interest in the lives of those who came before him, but Kira's case had left an indelible mark on him. He was curious to see how she was adjusting and whether his decision to intervene had made a difference. When Kira first saw the judge again, she froze. She didn't know if she was happy to see him or terrified that he might change his mind. But Judge Thompson wasn't there to pass judgment. Instead, he smiled warmly at her, offering a simple gesture of kindness. "How are you, Kira?" he asked, his voice kind. For the first time, she realized that he truly cared. He wasn't just a judge. He was someone who wanted to see her succeed. Despite the progress she was making, Kira still struggled with bouts of self-doubt. She would look at other children and wonder if they had ever felt the loneliness and pain she had endured. It was hard for her to fully embrace the life that had been offered to her. One afternoon, during a group activity at school, Kira found herself distancing herself from the other kids, retreating to the corner of the room. Mrs. Roberts noticed immediately and pulled her aside. "Kira," she said gently, "I know it's hard, but you're allowed to be happy here. You've earned it." Kira's eyes welled with tears, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to cry. Mrs. Roberts simply hugged her, offering the kind of comfort Kira hadn't known she needed. Slowly, Kira started to understand that happiness wasn't something she had to earn. It was something she deserved. As weeks passed, Kira's relationships with her peers began to shift. She found herself connecting with other students, especially with a girl named Maya, who had also faced difficulties in her life. Maya had been through her own struggles with an abusive home situation, and the two of them bonded over their shared experiences. They spent hours talking, laughing, and supporting one another. Kira realized that for the first time, she wasn't alone. Maya had become her closest friend, and Kira felt something she had never experienced before: trust. But the road to trust wasn't always easy. There were moments when Kira would pull away, afraid of getting hurt again. Maya, however, was patient, and over time, Kira began to open up more. With every conversation, Kira was learning that true friendship wasn't about perfection. It was about being there for each other, no matter the past. One afternoon, Mrs. Miller sat Kira down for an important conversation. "Kira," she began, "I know you've been through so much, but I want you to know that you're part of our family now. We're not just your foster parents. We're your family. We love you, and we'll always be here for you, no matter what." Kira's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at Mrs. Miller. The words felt like a balm on the wounds she had carried for so long. She had always thought that love was conditional, something you had to earn. But Mrs. Miller's words made her realize that true love was unconditional. It was the kind of love that didn't ask for anything in return, the kind of love that healed wounds and helped build a future. As months passed, Kira's confidence continued to grow, but so did the complexities of her past. One evening, during dinner with Mrs. Miller and her husband, Kira quietly shared her deepest fear. "What if I'm not meant to be here? What if you realize you don't really want me?" Her voice was fragile, but there was honesty in it. Mrs. Miller, who had come to love Kira like her own, gently took her hand. "Kira, you're meant to be here," she said softly. "We want you, and we're never going to stop loving you." Kira felt something shift within her. For the first time, she believed it. She believed in belonging. Despite the new love and stability she had found, Kira still struggled with the emotional scars left by her past. Flashbacks of being abandoned and alone in a cold world often came rushing in, leaving her shaken. Mrs. Miller noticed Kira's withdrawn behavior and gently suggested therapy again. This time, Kira agreed. The therapy sessions helped her unpack the years of trauma, though the process was painful. Kira often left feeling emotionally drained, but with each session, she was able to release pieces of her past. The road was long, but for the first time, Kira could see a path toward healing. At school, Kira's newfound strength began to reflect in her grades. She went from being a quiet, unsure student to someone who actively participated in class. Mrs. Roberts, Kira's teacher, recognized her progress and encouraged her to enter the school's academic competition. Kira hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready to take such a big step, but Maya, her closest friend, pushed her to take the leap, offering unwavering support. After some coaxing, Kira entered the competition and, to her surprise, won first place in the district. It was a turning point, a moment where Kira realized that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. One day, out of nowhere, Kira received a letter. It was from her biological mother, the woman who had abandoned her years ago. The letter was full of apologies, explaining that she had been struggling with addiction and that she now wanted to reconnect. Kira stared at the letter in disbelief. She wasn't sure what to feel. Part of her was angry, while another part felt an odd sense of curiosity. She decided to take the letter to Mrs. Miller for advice. Together, they talked it through, and Mrs. Miller gently told Kira that she didn't need to rush into a decision. Kira knew she had to think it through carefully. It was a defining moment for her. She could choose to forgive, but it would take time. Kira's life took another unexpected turn when the judge, who had originally dismissed her case, called her into his office. Judge Thompson had been following her progress from afar and was deeply impressed by her growth. He had recently learned of a scholarship program for young students from challenging backgrounds, and he encouraged Kira to apply. "You've overcome so much, Kira," he said. "You deserve this opportunity." Kira was overwhelmed. The scholarship could mean a better education, a brighter future. It was an opportunity she had never dared to dream of. She applied, heart pounding, and prayed that it would change the course of her life. As the deadline for the scholarship application neared, Kira threw herself into her studies. She spent late nights writing essays, researching, and preparing for the interview. During this time, her relationship with Mrs. Miller deepened. Mrs. Miller had become a true mother figure to Kira, and their bond was unshakable. "You're doing amazing, Kira," Mrs. Miller often said, reminding her to stay focused. "You have everything it takes." With each word of encouragement, Kira began to feel that she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And with that, she pushed forward, determined to achieve her goals. The day Kira received the letter was one she would never forget. Mrs. Miller opened the envelope, her hands trembling. When she read the words aloud, Kira's heart leapt into her chest. "Congratulations! You have been awarded the scholarship." It felt like a dream. Tears of joy filled Kira's eyes as she hugged Mrs. Miller tightly. This was more than just an academic award. It was proof that she had fought through the hardest times and had come out stronger on the other side. The scholarship wasn't just for education. It was a symbol of her resilience and determination. With the scholarship in hand, Kira enrolled in a prestigious high school where she began to flourish academically. She still faced challenges. There were moments of self-doubt, times when she felt like an outsider, but she no longer allowed those feelings to define her. She became a strong advocate for others who had experienced similar hardships, volunteering at local organizations to support kids in foster care. Kira knew that if she could help even one child find hope the way she had, it would be worth it. Months passed, and Kira began to feel more at ease in her new life. Then one day, she received another letter from her biological mother. This time, the tone was different. It wasn't full of apologies, but instead, a request for a reunion. Kira was torn. She had come so far, and part of her wanted to forgive, to finally understand her mother's side. After much thought, she agreed to meet. When they sat down face to face, Kira was calm, but firm. "I've forgiven you," she said quietly, "but I've also moved on. My life is here now." Her biological mother nodded, understanding the depth of Kira's journey. The meeting wasn't about reconciliation. It was about healing. As Kira continued her studies, she couldn't shake the memory of Judge Thompson. His decision had changed her life, and she often wondered how many other children had been given a second chance because of his empathy. She began to research the judge's career and found that he had made it his mission to reform the juvenile justice system, advocating for more compassionate approaches toward young offenders. Inspired by his work, Kira decided that she too wanted to make a difference. She set her sights on a future in law, determined to help others who had been forgotten by the system. By the time Kira graduated from high school, she had become a beacon of hope in her community. She delivered a speech at her graduation ceremony, telling her story and encouraging others to never give up, no matter the circumstances. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw Mrs. Miller, Maya, and even Judge Thompson in the audience, all proud of the young woman she had become. For the first time in her life, Kira felt truly at peace. Her past no longer defined her. She was ready to take on the world, one step at a time. Kira's journey into law school wasn't an easy one, but it was a testament to her strength and perseverance. Every time she faced a challenge, she thought back to the days when she lived on the streets, hungry and alone. Those dark moments became fuel for her ambition. She had worked tirelessly to earn her scholarship and had already proven to herself that she was capable of great things. Law school, however, proved to be more challenging than anything she had encountered before. The lectures were tough, the competition fierce, and the pressure constant. But Kira refused to back down. She had a mission: to become an advocate for children like herself, children who had fallen through the cracks. Her professors noticed her dedication, and although she struggled at times, they saw something special in her. She wasn't just book smart, she was deeply driven by the desire to make a difference. When Kira stumbled, Mrs. Miller was always there, offering words of encouragement and reminding her of the path she had chosen. "You're going to do amazing things," Mrs. Miller often said, her voice full of belief. As Kira progressed through law school, she found herself drawn to the field of juvenile justice. It was a natural fit. After all, it was the very system that had both failed her and given her a second chance. She volunteered at legal clinics, providing pro bono services to underprivileged children who found themselves trapped in the system. Every case she worked on reminded her of her own struggles, and every success, no matter how small, made her feel like she was making a difference. One day, Kira was approached by a group of students who had been working on a class project about juvenile reform. They were impressed by her passion and invited her to collaborate on a paper about the intersection of poverty and juvenile justice. Kira eagerly accepted. Working on this project felt like the culmination of everything she had worked for. It was her chance to change the system from the inside out. Several years into law school, Kira's life had taken a new shape. She had successfully completed her first year with impressive grades and was beginning to make a name for herself within her field. One day, as she sat in her apartment studying for an upcoming exam, Kira received an unexpected phone call. It was from Judge Thompson. "Hello, Kira." His voice sounded warm, as always. "I wanted to check in on you. I've been following your progress, and I'm incredibly proud of how far you've come. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to let you know that you're always welcome to reach out if you need any advice or guidance." Kira's heart swelled with gratitude. She had never forgotten how much Judge Thompson had believed in her all those years ago. She quickly thanked him, and they talked for a while about her experiences in law school. It was a conversation that reignited her sense of purpose. She realized that, with her education and passion, She could do exactly what the judge had done for her. She could offer others the chance to rebuild their lives. In her final year of law school, Kira landed an internship at a prestigious law firm. The firm specialized in juvenile law, a field she had grown increasingly passionate about. The internship was a dream come true, but it came with its own challenges. Kira was often one of the only women of color in the room, and at times she felt like an outsider. The lawyers she worked with were highly accomplished, but there was an underlying tension as she navigated her place in this new world. One particularly challenging case came across her desk. A young boy had been arrested for a minor crime and was facing serious charges due to a lack of legal representation. Kira worked tirelessly on the case, leveraging everything she had learned in law school and from her own experiences. When the boy was finally granted a reduced sentence, Kira felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. She knew she was on the right path. Kira's growing reputation in the juvenile justice field was both a blessing and a challenge. She quickly realized that the road to making real change would not be easy. During a key internship, she worked with a team that was preparing to represent a group of children from a disadvantaged background who had been wrongfully accused of a crime. The opposition was strong, the case daunting, but Kira's belief in the importance of justice kept her focused. On the day of the trial, Kira gave her first official closing argument in court. She stood before the judge, the jury, and her colleagues, pouring her heart into every word. She spoke not only for her clients, but also for every child who had been overlooked by the system. The case ended in a landmark decision that favored the children, but Kira didn't feel like a hero. To her, it was just another step in a lifelong journey. After her internship, Kira was offered a full-time position at the law firm. It felt surreal. She had come so far since those first days in foster care. But even as she celebrated her success, Kira knew that the real work was just beginning. She was driven by a passion that no amount of success could ever quell. As her career took off, she decided to start her own non-profit organization dedicated to helping children navigate the juvenile justice system. Her work began to make headlines. Her non-profit provided free legal assistance to young people in need, and Kira herself became a sought-after speaker in juvenile reform circles. She had created something meaningful, a legacy of hope for those who, like her, had once been forgotten. As Kira's non-profit grew, she began to encounter systemic roadblocks that challenged her every step of the way. Corruption, bureaucracy, and budget cuts all threatened her mission. But Kira refused to back down. She lobbied for new policies, met with lawmakers, and even testified before a congressional committee. Her voice echoed with conviction as she advocated for the rights of vulnerable children. One pivotal moment came when she led a national campaign to reform juvenile sentencing laws. She worked tirelessly for months, rallying public support and building coalitions with other reform-minded groups. When the bill passed, Kira was overwhelmed with emotion. This victory was proof that change could happen when people refused to give up. Just as things seemed to be going perfectly, Kira faced an unexpected setback. One of the children she had been advocating for was wrongfully incarcerated in an adult facility due to a clerical error. The legal battle to bring him back into a juvenile facility was exhausting, and at times, Kira wondered if it was all worth it. She felt like she was fighting an impossible battle. But then, she received an unexpected call. It was Judge Thompson, who had been following her work closely. "Kira," he said gently, "I know it feels like you're fighting a never-ending battle, but I believe in you. Keep pushing forward. The system will only change if we make it change." Kira was reinvigorated by his words. She pushed forward with renewed vigor, and after months of legal battles, the boy was finally released from the adult prison. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. Through all of Kira's triumphs and challenges, she never forgot her foster family, especially Mrs. Miller, who had been by her side through every step of her journey. One evening, as Kira sat in her office, she received a call from Mrs. Miller. Kira, Mrs. Miller said softly, I know you're busy, but there's something I want to tell you. Your mother has reached out again, and this time, she's clean. She wants to meet you. Kira took a deep breath. She had come a long way since that first letter from her mother. After careful thought, Kira decided to meet with her biological mother one final time. This time, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closure. When they met, Kira looked her mother in the eye and simply said, I've built a life now, and it's a good one. Thank you for letting me be the person I am. Her mother nodded, tears in her eyes, and they both walked away from that meeting with a sense of peace. Years later, Kira stood before a room of her peers at a major juvenile justice conference delivering a keynote address. Her voice was strong, and her words carried the weight of her experiences. She spoke of her past, of Judge Thompson's life-changing decision, and of the work that still lay ahead. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, a force for change. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and as Kira stepped off the stage, she was greeted by none other than Judge Thompson himself. You've done more than I ever expected, Kira, he said with a proud smile. Kira smiled back, humbled by his words. I couldn't have done it without you, Judge. After years of hard work, Kira was now the owner of a successful law firm, one dedicated to advocating for underrepresented children in the juvenile justice system. She had gathered a talented team of young, passionate attorneys who shared her vision for change. Together, they worked on cases that gave voice to the voiceless and fought for fair treatment for those who had been neglected by the system. Kira often reflected on how far she had come. She could hardly believe that the girl who had once stood before Judge Thompson, hungry and desperate, was now at the forefront of a national movement for justice. Yet, with each new victory, Kira understood that her work was just beginning. There were still too many children who suffered in silence. Too many young lives caught in the web of a broken system. At the end of every long workday, Kira would sit down at her desk and write letters to children she had helped, offering them encouragement and reminding them that their past did not define their future. She often received letters in return, letters from kids who now had hope because of her. These letters reminded her why she continued fighting, despite the exhaustion, despite the setbacks. As Kira's influence in the legal field grew, so did her public profile. She was invited to speak at prestigious conferences, sit on panels with renowned judges, and collaborate with lawmakers to help reform juvenile sentencing laws. Her advocacy was gaining national attention, and with it came new challenges. Kira was now a symbol of hope and change, but with that came pressure. One evening, after a particularly grueling public hearing, Kira collapsed onto her couch, exhausted. Her phone buzzed with texts from various people, supporters, friends, and media outlets. She had just delivered a powerful speech on the need for reform in the juvenile system, and it had left a significant impact. But as she scrolled through the messages, Kira felt a pang of loneliness. Despite her professional success, she often wondered if the personal connections she had made could truly understand her struggles. Maya, her closest friend from childhood, noticed the change in Kira's demeanor. The two of them had remained close over the years, and Maya often reminded Kira that she wasn't alone. You've done more than most people will ever dream of, Kira, Maya told her one night during dinner, but you still need to take care of yourself. Don't forget that. Kira smiled, grateful for the unwavering support of those who loved her. Still, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. Although Kira had come a long way, there were still lingering doubts and unresolved feelings about her past. One evening, while going through old files, Kira came across the letter from her biological mother, the one that had started the chain of events that had brought her so far. She had kept it all these years, unsure of whether to keep it or destroy it. Her heart heavy with mixed emotions, Kira decided it was time to face her past head-on. She drove to the place where she had grown up, the foster home that had been her only sanctuary for so many years. Standing there, she realized just how much had changed. The building seemed smaller, less imposing. It was no longer the place that defined her. Kira walked into the office of Mrs. Miller, who was now retired but still a guiding presence in her life. "I'm ready," Kira said softly. "I think I can finally let go of the past." Mrs. Miller nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "You've always been ready, Kira. It's just taken time for you to realize it. Now you have the power to shape your own future, without looking back." That day, Kira made peace with the past. She left behind the memories of abandonment, of hunger, and of fear. What mattered now was the woman she had become, and the legacy she was building for the future. As Kira's work in juvenile reform expanded, so did the scope of her impact. One day, she received a call from a national organization focused on criminal justice reform. They were planning a major initiative to challenge the disproportionate incarceration of minority youth and wanted Kira to lead the charge. It was a monumental opportunity, but Kira knew it would require all of her energy and resources. As she sat in her office, reviewing the details of the project, she realized that this was more than just a professional opportunity. It was a chance to make the kind of change she had always dreamed of. This initiative could reshape the way society viewed and treated young people of color within the justice system. Kira knew that it wouldn't be easy. There would be opposition, and the road would be long. But she was ready for the challenge. She had fought too hard to let this opportunity slip away. The initiative Kira had led became one of the most successful campaigns for juvenile justice reform in recent years. With her leadership, the organization was able to push through new policies that reduced the criminalization of minority youth and offered rehabilitation-focused programs instead of punitive measures. Kira was recognized for her tireless work, and her law firm became a model for how legal practices could drive social change. But Kira's real reward came when she stood before a group of young people at one of her firm's community outreach programs.